At 30 years old, Elena Hayes had once believed that as long as she devoted herself completely, a marriage built on love could never fall apart. But that morning, at the marble coffee table inside the Vance family mansion, her mother-in-law threw an agreement in front of her and declared that $50,000 was the final price for 6 years of her life. Clara Vance stood before Elena and told her that Daniel no longer needed a wife from a poor background holding him back. The upcoming merger would transform Nexus into a leading design corporation, and her son needed a woman more worthy of standing beside him. The woman they had chosen was Olivia Grant, the daughter of the owner of a construction materials conglomerate. Olivia could bring them enormous contracts, while Elena had already outlived her usefulness. Elena remained silent. That silence convinced Clara that she had finally been cornered. 6 years earlier, Nexus had been nothing more than a small studio on the verge of bankruptcy. Daniel had ambition, but he had no system, no team, and no money to pay salaries. Elena had just completed her research on a spatial rendering algorithm. Her technology reduced the time required to simulate interior spaces from several days to only a few hours. Elena worked 16 hours a day. She corrected blueprints, built data libraries, wrote thousands of lines of code, and stayed awake through the night until her eyes burned red. Daniel took those designs to meet clients. He stood beneath the spotlight, accepted awards, and was praised as an architectural genius. Elena never fought him for recognition. She believed that a husband and wife were a team. To protect her husband's pride, she refused to have her name placed on the board of directors and allowed Daniel to represent them on numerous documents. That was the greatest mistake she had ever made. As Nexus prepared for the merger, Daniel began coming home late, locking his phone and telling Elena that she no longer fit the company's new image. During the final meeting, he placed Olivia in the position of creative director, then demanded that Elena hand over all of the system data. Elena refused. That night, Daniel did not come home. The following morning, Clara arrived with a lawyer. The agreement required Elena to surrender every right related to the designs, algorithms, and intellectual property created during their marriage. If she signed it, she would receive $50,000. If she refused, Clara declared that she would make sure Elena left with nothing. Daniel walked in at that exact moment. He did not look at his wife. He simply told her coldly to sign it and not turn the situation into a scandal. In that moment, Elena finally saw every dark corner of the powerful family she had endured for years. The husband she had once saved from bankruptcy had never regarded her as an equal partner. To him, she had only been a ladder that allowed him to climb higher. No physical or emotional torment could hurt as much as the moment Elena realized that, throughout their 6 years together, she had been the only one who believed their love was real. She lowered her gaze and turned to the final page. Clara smiled. Daniel breathed a sigh of relief. Neither of them knew that Elena had noticed a fatal error in the description of the intellectual property. They knew even less that the core patent had never belonged to Nexus. Elena picked up the pen, signed her name slowly, and pushed the document back across the table. Looking directly at Clara, she said, "You are right. I accept." Clara believed she had won. Daniel believed the final obstacle had disappeared. But when Elena walked out of the mansion carrying a small suitcase, she was not carrying defeat with her. She was carrying evidence, the true ownership rights, and a decision she had kept hidden for 6 years. The Vance family would soon understand the price of looking down on her. Less than 5 minutes after the car left the Vance mansion, Elena opened her phone, removed the old SIM card, and inserted another one that she had kept hidden for 6 years. The call lasted only a few seconds. On the other end of the line, Alexander Hayes remained silent as he listened to his sister explain that she had signed the agreement and left the house. But when Elena mentioned that Daniel and Clara intended to seize the entire rendering algorithm, the man's voice immediately turned cold. "Where are you?" Elena looked through the window. The mansion behind her had already disappeared from view. "I am on my way home." Alexander Hayes was not merely Elena's older brother. He was the chairman of Hayes International Architectural Investment Group, an ecosystem that owned investment funds, materials laboratories, and dozens of construction technology companies across multiple countries. In the financial world, a single decision from Alexander could suspend a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Before taking control of the family corporation, he had led an auditing division specializing in the investigation of complex technology-related financial fraud. Daniel had never known any of this. In his eyes, Elena was merely a woman who had grown up in a small town, with a frequently ill mother and no remaining contact with her biological family. Elena had never mentioned the Hayes family fortune because she wanted to prove her abilities on her own. She had lived like a hidden heiress, renting a small apartment, working independently, and entering her marriage to Daniel without bringing a single privilege with her. But her humility had been mistaken for weakness. That evening, Elena did not return to the Hayes family estate. She rented a one-bedroom apartment in an old neighborhood and continued playing the role of a woman who had just been abandoned by her husband. She brought only her clothes, her personal computer, and a hard drive containing the complete development logs of the algorithm from many years earlier. Alexander wanted to bring his sister home immediately. Elena refused. She needed Daniel to believe that she had been completely defeated. While Clara bragged to her friends that she had finally driven her poor and worthless daughter-in-law out of the family, a team of lawyers, intellectual property specialists, and forensic auditors secretly began reviewing the entire financial structure of Nexus. It did not take them long to discover signs of irregularities. 3 months earlier, while Elena had been caring for her mother in the hospital, a set of documents transferring ownership of the algorithm had been filed under her name. The signature on the documents was so similar to hers that the difference was almost impossible to detect with the naked eye, but it was forged. Server data revealed that the document had been created on the computer belonging to Daniel's personal assistant. The network address used to submit the file had originated from Clara's legal office. Even worse, the patent had not been transferred directly to Nexus. It had been placed inside a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, where Daniel and Clara used multiple layers of anonymous shareholders to conceal profits and avoid tax obligations. Elena read each report in silence. She had once believed that Daniel had betrayed her because of ambition. Now she understood that he had been preparing this plan for a very long time. Their marriage, his declarations of love, and even the concern he had shown for her mother might have been nothing more than a curtain hiding his greed. Alexander stood beside the window with both hands clenched tightly. All he had to do was give the order, and the immense power of the Hayes family would be enough to crush Nexus in a single day. But Elena stopped him. It was not time yet. She did not want Daniel to simply lose his company. She wanted him to walk onto the stage himself, claim all the credit himself, and close off every possible escape route in front of hundreds of investors. At the same time, Daniel and Clara were hosting a party at the most luxurious hotel in the city. Expensive wine filled every glass. Olivia stood beside Daniel in a silver dress, while Clara raised her glass and announced that Nexus had removed the final obstacle before its public listing. Daniel laughed loudly. He believed the algorithm belonged to him. He believed Elena was crying alone in a cheap room. No one inside the grand ballroom knew that the shell company's accounts were already being monitored, the forged signature had already been examined, and the asset-freezing documents were awaiting final approval. Elena closed the file. Outside the window, the city was still glowing brightly. And on the other side of the darkness, Daniel and Clara Vance were raising their glasses to celebrate a victory they had never truly possessed. The real show was yet to begin. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, Daniel Vance stepped onto the stage at the shareholders' meeting with the smile of a man who believed the entire future was already in his hands. Behind him, a massive screen displayed the Nexus logo alongside architectural simulations that had helped the company win a series of international awards. Hundreds of investors, reporters, and representatives from major corporations filled the grand hall. In just a few minutes, Daniel would sign a strategic investment agreement, complete the merger, and bring Nexus one step closer to going public. Clara sat in the front row wearing an emerald green dress. She kept smiling for the cameras, proudly telling everyone around her that her son had built this empire from nothing. Olivia stood near the stage, wearing the ring Daniel had recently given her. She was ready to replace Elena in every interview as the woman standing beside the architectural genius. No one mentioned Elena. 2 months after the shareholders' meeting ended in chaos, the Nexus sign was removed from the building that had once symbolized Daniel Vance's ambition. There was no farewell ceremony, there was no applause. There were only employees carrying cardboard boxes through the grand lobby, where architectural awards still hung on the walls like evidence of an era built on someone else's talent. When Elena withdrew Nexus's right to use the algorithm, the company's entire design system was nearly paralyzed. Projects already in progress could no longer continue their simulations. Clients canceled their contracts one after another. The investors who had once competed for the chance to shake Daniel's hand no longer answered his calls. The loans came due. Shares connected to the merger were suspended indefinitely. The accounts of the shell company in the Cayman Islands were frozen after investigators discovered illegal cash flows. Daniel had once believed that money could solve everything, but for the first time in his life, he realized that some mistakes could not be bought back with an apology. He was stripped of all authority over Nexus and faced charges related to signature forgery, financial fraud, and tax evasion. The magazines that had once called him an architectural genius removed their old articles one after another. Award committees also began reviewing his records. His reputation collapsed even faster than his company. Inside a cramped rented apartment, Daniel sat in front of an old computer, sending job applications to dozens of small studios. No one wanted to hire a man who had stolen technology from his own wife. The man who had once stood before hundreds of investors was now producing basic drawings under short-term contracts just to pay his legal debts. Every time he saw a building bearing Elena's influence, Daniel remembered the nights she had stayed awake at her desk. Back then, he had seen it only as a wife's duty. Only now did he understand that she had handed him an entire empire, and he had traded it all for greed and betrayal. Clara did not escape the consequences either. To compensate for the legal damages and settle the guarantees she had made for Nexus, she was forced to sell the mansion, her luxury cars, and most of the assets registered under her name. On the day bank employees arrived to seal the house, Clara stood in the middle of the living room, in the exact place where she had once thrown the agreement down in front of Elena. The marble table was still there, but this time, Clara was the one being forced to leave. She carried several suitcases through the gate beneath the cold stares of her neighbors. The people who had once surrounded her at high society parties now avoided mentioning the Vance name. Clara had spent her entire life looking down on others because of their backgrounds and wealth. In the end, she was the one thrown out of her home, with no status left to hide the emptiness inside her. That was the lesson awaiting the greedy. Not everyone who remains silent is weak. Not everyone who dresses simply is powerless. And kindness cannot always be exploited forever. While the Vance family fell apart, Elena began rebuilding her life. She regained 100% ownership of the algorithm, refused to return and live beneath the shadow of her family corporation, and founded an architectural technology company under her own name. Alexander offered to provide all the capital she needed. Elena accepted only a small portion. This time, she wanted every achievement to be built with her real identity, her real abilities, and people who genuinely respected her. Less than a year later, Elena's system was being used in numerous hospital, school, and energy-efficient housing projects. She rehired employees who had been dismissed by Nexus, gave equity ownership to the core engineers, and made sure everyone received proper recognition for their contributions. At the opening ceremony for the new headquarters, Elena stood before a glass wall overlooking the city. She felt no satisfaction from their suffering. Her revenge had ended the moment the truth was revealed. What Elena wanted to hold on to was not the image of Daniel kneeling before her or Clara losing the mansion. What she kept was the lesson she had learned about her own value. 6 years of silence had not turned Elena into a failure. It had only made the earthquake that followed when she finally stood up even more powerful. Because the silence of an intelligent person is not always a sign of fear. Sometimes, it is the final moment of stillness before they reclaim everything that was always theirs. Daniel began his speech by telling the story of the company's difficult early years. He claimed that he had researched the rendering algorithm himself, designed the system himself, and single-handedly pulled Nexus back from the edge of bankruptcy. Every lie was met with applause from the crowd. The longer Daniel spoke, the more confident he became. He did not notice that several lawyers at the back of the hall had quietly risen from their seats. He also had no idea that the representatives of the investment fund had just received an urgent file on their tablets. As Daniel prepared to put pen to paper, the large doors at the back of the hall suddenly opened. The sound of footsteps echoed across the stone floor. Alexander Hayes appeared in a black suit, followed by a team of lawyers, data authentication experts, and 2 representatives from the Intellectual Property Authority. Walking beside him was Elena. The simple sweater and exhausted appearance of the woman who had been driven from her home were gone. Elena wore a white suit, her hair neatly tied back, and her gaze was so calm that it appeared cold. Everyone in the hall turned around. Clara shot to her feet. For several seconds, she did not recognize the daughter-in-law she had once tried to dismiss with $50,000. Daniel's face went pale. He demanded to know what Elena was doing there. Elena did not answer. She walked directly onto the stage and placed a hard drive and a stack of documents in front of him. Alexander introduced himself. The moment the name Hayes was spoken, whispers immediately spread throughout the hall. Every investor knew how powerful and influential his family's corporation was. Clara froze when she realized that Elena was not the poor, insignificant woman she had always believed her to be. But the real revelation had only just begun. The screen behind Daniel suddenly changed to display the algorithm's development logs. Line after line of data showed that Elena had built the system before she married him. The file creation dates, original source code, and personal registration records all matched. Next came the results of the signature examination. The signature on the patent transfer agreement was forged. The network address used to submit the documents led back to Clara's legal office. The file had been created on the computer belonging to Daniel's assistant. The money had then been routed through a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Daniel took a step backward. He claimed that it was all a misunderstanding. Alexander replied that all the evidence had already been transferred to the financial investigation authorities and the tax agency. At that exact moment, a legal representative stepped onto the stage and handed Daniel an emergency order, freezing his assets and suspending every transaction connected to Nexus. The atmosphere inside the hall turned to ice. The investors closed their folders one after another. The representative of the Strategic Investment Fund withdrew the pen intended for the signing. Reporters raised their cameras, capturing every trace of panic on Daniel's face. Clara rushed toward Elena and insisted that this was nothing more than a private family matter. Elena looked at her for a long moment. 6 years ago, you never considered me part of your family. Clara had no response. Her face turned deathly pale before her body collapsed beside the front row of seats. Daniel dropped to his knees near the stage and tried to grab Elena's hand. He begged her to withdraw the complaint, promising to return everything and start over from the beginning. But Elena had waited far too long for this moment. She did not need to punish her terrible husband with anger. She only needed to let the truth speak for itself. In front of hundreds of cameras, Elena announced that she was withdrawing all rights for Nexus to use the algorithm. It was only a single sentence, but it caused the empire Daniel had spent 6 years stealing to begin collapsing on the very stage he had once used to claim credit for her work. What would you have done in Elena's place? Would you have walked away quietly or exposed every lie in front of the entire world? Share your opinion in the comments and tell us which city you are watching from. If this story reminded you that silence is not weakness, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more powerful family drama, betrayal, revenge, and unexpected twists. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Remember, never let anyone underestimate your worth. Sometimes the person they look down on is the one holding all the power.